Football Manager, Civilization 6, Baby Iguanas, and George Osborn from the Deep Line Podcast. This is Staying In.
So that was all fun and games, but yes, long story short, I have played Football Manager 2017.
Excellent. And Dan,
I'm still languishing behind in the lowly Football Manager 2016. Which one have you played, Pete?
Well, I've played Championship Manager on the free one on the mobile telephone.
Okay,
but I don't think it's. Is it? I think it's Championship Manager.
That is it.
I wouldn't say it's comparable in any way, shape, or form.
No.
Well, it's got footballers
and managers.
It's got managers,
and you do managing.
You've got statistics.
It's true. Yeah,
and you've got all these things. The reason that I'm like, this is going to be a heck of a show is because I sort of feel like I'm the luckiest guy in the world right now because I basically have you two to tell me why I should care at all about Football Manager 2017.
Right.
When I have no experience really of Football Manager or football managers or really football. Yeah. So
I think the easiest thing would be, rather than focusing on 2017, maybe just focusing on the series of Football Manager.
Well, okay, let's talk about Football Manager in general then. What is it?
What is it? What is it? It's one of those video games. In it, you click a thing.
You press buttons and things happen on screen. And
then a match of football is played, and then your team wins or it loses, depending upon the buttons that you've pressed, and in particular, the buttons of which players you've decided to put in your team, how you've set them up, and what you do with them during the game.
So it's I've looked at screenshots. I've played bits and pieces of it. My understand, and I think I played a version of. I did actually play a Championship Manager. When I think it was when Half-Life came out. My friend was into football, and that was when I think Championship Manager was still good because it was made by these people.
Yes.
So now, have they put actual playing the game in it? As in, like playing? Is it like FIFA?
No. So
so that's still not in there.
So the whole thing is that it's about you being a manager of a team, and managers of a team, aside from player managers. I was at an Opta quiz last night. It was a very, very strange thing. Opta do sports stats for things like football and cricket and other things like that. But I was at this quiz last night, and they were doing name all of the player managers who've managed Premier League football teams. And it's just like, it's completely died out, this concept of the manager being able to go and run out onto the pitch and try and score a goal. So it's more about building a squad of players, keeping them happy, having lots of different options so that if a game is going badly, you can do something differently to try and win instead, and just generally watching things but then trying to make little tweaks and changes to make sure that you succeed, instead of being able to actually sort of go out and boot the ball, because you can't boot the ball as a manager. You're not allowed to run onto the pitch and do that, because otherwise you get in trouble. So
can I just check before we go too far into this? What I don't want is to lose Pete right at the start. Okay.
No, right. I'm not lost.
So I just want to check, Pete, that you are fully okay with the concept of a football match and what goes on over the course of a football match.
Mostly, and I've had a coffee, so I'm caffeinated and willing to learn. But yes, I think I've got a basic grasp of how football works, because I've played because Dan, you and I and Sam and Chris, we've played. FIFA, we won the World Cup.
Nice.
Before we've won the World Cup in a FIFA game.
Very good.
So I understand roughly how all of that sort of stuff works.
So in terms of tactics and how you play and making substitutions and choosing certain players to play, all that stuff.
Yeah. No, that sort of stuff kind of goes over my head a little bit, but I think I get the very basics. So as I understand it, this is a game that is about. It is very much about, as the title says, it is very much about management in the same way that, let's say, maybe something like Motorsport Manager works?
Exactly. Yeah, that's
Right.
it. That
Okay.
I mean, because Motorsport Manager is coming out this week on PC. It's
okay.
and that I'm really, really interested in seeing how
Yeah,
that one plays
yeah,
out
me too,
because
'cause I thought the original was great.
the mobile game, exactly, the mobile game was superb, and I played Motorsport Manager at EGX earlier this year, and it was fascinating. It was really, really good, really well done. But yeah, I mean, like, I guess the way, if there's someone out there who's listening to this and is like, you know, what's the best way of envisaging this? I kind of see it as the difference between playing, say, a first-person shooter where you're in the midst of an action versus playing a real-time strategy game where you're over the top of the action. So So I mean, the thing about the manager is in Football Manager, you're not going to like the full extent of like theme park. You know, like if you're playing a game like Theme Park, you're building the attractions, but then you're also doing like the stands for the refreshments and managing the queues and things like that. With Football Manager, you have like the structure of a football club around you. There's a board who run the team, you know, as like a sort of a full business. You've got the players who, you know, are there when you start the game, and your coaches and things like that. So you kind of have a very defined role, but within that you can do all sorts of different things, including deciding who you buy, deciding which players you put on the pitch, the formations, how those formations work, etc., etc. So there's scope, but it's trammelled down some handy lines to make sure that it is really just about being a manager.
And how approachable is this? Like Dan, you know my gaming tastes incredibly well. You know, like, how, as somebody, like, say for example, you know, someone's listening to this and they're like, I don't really like football at all.
Yeah.
Like, is this accessible to somebody who doesn't like football in the same way that, like, maybe Out of the Park, the baseball management game, or, you know, as we talked about, like Motorsport Manager, or even, you know, as George was saying there, like a real-time strategy game is to somebody who's not necessarily interested in war. Like, if I'm not into football, which I'm not, like, is Football Manager a game that you can enjoy, or do you have to be deeply, deeply rooted?
If you look at the full title of Football Manager, you certainly would be at a disadvantage if you didn't have a pre-existing.
But why is that?
Well, just because of the fundamentals of understanding football, that as a football fan you would automatically understand and think of, that the game may not walk you through. However, what it does have is and it was introduced, I think, in because it's an annual game. I think it was introduced in Football Manager 2013. A classic mode, which I think is called Touch now, and it's basically a slimmed down version of it. Because one of the things that is kind of one of the legends of Football Manager is the fact that it's such a time eater, where players can pile in hours and hours and hours in, where marriages have been broken up because the guy has not been able to stop playing this game, and it is real time eater.
Yeah, that's it.
So what they did was introduce a slimmed down version, which was the classic or the now touch version, which you can also cross-platform with an iPad and kind of and tablets like that, which I know you're a big fan of your mobile devices. And with that, it slims it all down and it makes it a lot more streamlined and easier and a lot more quicker. And I think that version, as a gateway, might be much easier to get a handle of for a non-fan like yourself.
So what? Okay, so that's really fascinating. So why is it that version? I don't want to specifically talk about that touch version, but what is it that Football Manager 17 and, you know, all the main PC football managers, what additional depth are we talking about that goes beyond that usual that tablet version, but also the free-to-play tablet versions
the touch version does come with the game. When you buy Football Manager, you will buy the full version, and included with that is another game mode, which is the touch version, and then you can buy the tablet version, which you can then cross-platform between them. So if you want to play it on tablet, you buy an extra title, but you get that slimmed-down version there. But I think, I've not played a lot of the classic version. I don't know about you, George.
So I have played with it. I mean, I tend to dabble with it a little bit every year, just to sort of. I tend to review the game, so it's useful for me to have a quick look. But I mean, the essence of it is that if you go into the full mode and if you go into the full version of the game, you can set the game up with, if you've got the necessary processing grunt, you can set it up to have hundreds of leagues. And if you have hundreds of leagues, you have a database of potentially hundreds of thousands or millions of real players who you can search for and who your scouts can discover. And you can get into this game, and when you get into the match as well, when you get into everything that's going on, you've got all of these things like really detailed press conferences where you respond to questions from the press. You can have player interactions where someone goes, I'm really unhappy in the team, I want to go and move to a big club, why don't you sell me? And you go, hang on a minute, I'm not selling you because you're my best player. And he goes, no, I'm leaving. And you go, how about if someone bids 40 million for you, we'll let you go. And he goes, all right then, okay, that's fine. So you have those kind of interactions, whereas with touch, you pick free leagues and then it loads it, and then what happens is it just focuses on like the core loop, and like the core loop being, like that sort of, you go into the screen, you pick a team, you set that formation up, that formation goes out and plays a game, there's a result. Afterwards, you might have some injuries or suspensions, or your players might be tired because they've played a lot of games in recent times, so you have to change your team, but then you go through the next game. So like FM Touch is like the really streamlined, speedy version, whereas FM 17 is more full fat. And I think what Dan was saying about, can you get into it if you're not a football fan? There are ways that you can, and there are things that you can even do within the game itself that I think would make it easier. And I think probably the easiest one for that, even though I never use it, is you can turn off real players. So instead of it having real world players, it's just a database of entirely made up players. So it's simply then about looking at the numbers. But like I think what Dan was saying about, you need to have like some knowledge of football beforehand. It is really useful to have that knowledge because it helps you to understand how formations work, and it understands how shapes and how teams interact with one another. Because what's really popular amongst like Football Manager players is going through famous teams in history, or looking at teams that are playing today and trying to replicate what they're doing. And so to be able to do that, you need to obviously be watching what they're doing or have read about them.
I'm prepared. This is the thing. I am prepared to go the distance, right? Because fun story. When I was at university, I tried to... I was like, I'm going to get into Total War.
Yeah.
Which is obviously a really good thing when you're at university. That's a really good call. And I was reading up all about it and stuff like that, and I managed to pick up a copy of Total War Shogun, and the game in the manual, I was like flicking through the manual and stuff like that, and it said we advise all players to go and read Sun Tzu's Art of War, and I was like. So off I told, and go and read like Art of War and stuff like that. Side note, didn't help at all. Couldn't figure out any of the controls. But I'm prepared to go. I'm prepared to go into it and with an open mind and actually do that research and so on. So you're talking, you're talking a lot about stats there.
Yes.
And you're talking a lot about, there's depth and knowing about players.
Yes. And
knowing about general tactics and that kind of stuff. One of the things I guess I'm sort of really interested in finding out is, how much of a simulation is this? Like, is it simply that like it's going, here is a spreadsheet full of numbers, and here is another spreadsheet full of numbers. Both of these spreadsheets of numbers are basically representations of players, and if you have more of this number versus more of this number, then this number is going to win out? Or is it that there is some sort of artificial intelligence going on, that the replays of the matches and all that sort of stuff that you get, that looks a little bit sort of like top-down sensible soccer sort of, that sort of thing, because I've sort of seen a few of those screenshots where you get that sort of top-down kicking the ball about and so on. Is it that there is actual simulation of a game of football going on, and in exactly the same way that again, like a little bit more like a FIFA is simulating an actual... Like if you let two AI teams in FIFA go, you'll see how that actually plays out.
Yeah.
Is that happening in the background of Football Manager, or is it just this number is bigger than this number?
There is certainly elements of that. I think people on this very podcast have in the past referred to Football Manager as merely spreadsheets, the game. And whilst I can understand the argument, because it's a game built on statistics and numbers, and the numbers are front and centre, I think the complexity of the use of those numbers takes it far beyond just using those numbers. So as George was saying, you have the numbers which would determine the attributes of a player. That is then influenced again by their mood. It's influenced by their current physical condition. It's influenced by the players around them. It's influenced by where you play them. So there's lots of different things making it very complex. And then on top of that, you can, for example, if I was playing a team, the exact same formation all season long, exactly the same, I might start off playing really well. During that season, the teams I'm coming up against will learn how I play, and then they will play against me in a way that's going to nullify my threats.
Really?
Yes.
Wow, that's really fascinating.
This is it. Football Manager, it's one of those games where, like Dan is saying, is that people think it's just numbers on spreadsheets boshing against each other. It's not. I've spoken with a lot of people who've got a lot of experience with the game. I've played it now in various guises for about 16 years, but I know people who've been there basically since the beginning.
I'm about the same as you.
Yeah, that's it. But I know people who've been from the very beginning, and they've explained to me sort of how it's evolved. And particularly in the last few years, there's been a really interesting shift away from... So what happened is, the way it used to work is you used to put players on the pitch in a certain formation, and then you would use these little sliders basically to determine like how attacking you were, or how hard your tackling would be, or whatever it would be, and you would put it like that. And what was happening was that people were basically learning how to game that, so that you could create these like super tactics that you would just slide things backwards and forwards, and voila, eventually you find the sweet spot, you're going to win. And that's what happened for a long time. And then what happened is that Sports Interactive a number of years ago changed it to a new system where you have things like first of all, you have like a mentality. So your team either adopts one of the things which is basically defensive, counter-attacking, a standard philosophy that's got no particular emphasis, attacking, or overload, which is like a really very aggressive philosophy. You then have a flexibility. You then basically can choose between how flexible your team is in terms of its structure. So you can choose teams that are very tactically rigid. So if a team is very, very rigid, then if you were playing like a 4-4-2, 4 defenders, 4 midfielders and 2 attackers, the defenders would defend, the midfielders would be in the middle, and the attackers would try and score the goals. Whereas if you switch that to being fluid, you get what I was discussing with Ajax, where you might have a defender who suddenly appears in the opposing penalty area for some reason because he's spotted the chance to make a run forwards. And the reason why that matters is that you take those two things, and then you take the system that you choose, and then you add in the players that you've chosen. So if, for example, you're wanting to play a very fluid system, you need players who are more intelligent. You need players who have got better decision-making. You need players who are tactically more astute. You need people who are fitter, so they're able to cover more ground. You also need, if you're playing a more fluid system, people who can do things, who can pass the ball well, but who can also tackle well, because they're going to need to do a bit of both. Whereas if you're playing a very rigid approach, what you could do is have someone who is very, very good at defending. He's really good at heading, he's really good at tackling, and he's really good at marking other opponents out of the game. But beyond that, he wouldn't need to do anything else because he just stays in one place and does things. And so what you need to do is you're not just putting some players in and hoping your numbers are the best. You need to think about, how do I build a tactic that works with the players that I've got and with the approaches that I can adopt. And so you have to sit there from scratch, look at your squad, look at the numbers, and try and work out roughly how everyone in your squad plays, and then use that as basically a building blocks for doing something such as building successful tactics. So there's a lot more to it, and particularly the idea of this AI. What I've noticed particularly in the last few years is it's much more adaptive. Like, you might be in a 2-goal lead at half time, but then the opponents will change their formation deliberately to counter your threats. And once they've done it, if one team does it and is successful, you often see other managers doing it as well, depending upon how smart they are.
I think you can understand from kind of explaining all the intricacies of it why it can be such a time drain, where people will plug days and weeks into this game. I play pretty much because I will get Football Manager most years, and by far every year that is the game I've put the most hours into without a shadow of a doubt.
Do you? Well, here's something. Do you happen to have? Do you both happen to have Steam open?
I don't have Steam open, but I do know that last year's game I put in a relatively small number of hours for me, which was 300. The top years. I mean, the most dedicated players who basically just play Football Manager will rack up 1,000 hours every year on it.
I have it open.
Oh gosh, Dan.
Football Manager 2016. Yeah. Again, it's not a massive number. So I've had these about a year. That's 323 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Jeez. I mean, that is very impressive. I mean, first of all, that seemed like, just in terms of raw value proposition, you've got your money's worth, right?
Can I just say, looking at some of the older games that I had, Football Manager 2012, I put in 850 hours.
Yeah, you were at uni then, though, right? No, it wouldn't have been. What were you doing, Dan?
I was in post-university malaise.
Jesus, Dan. So one of the other things that I find absolutely fascinating that it feels like you're sort of touching upon here is that. So from an outsider, if you're just looking at screenshots, it can feel very like unapproachable, mathematics, all of that sort of thing. But the way that you guys are describing it, it feels a lot like you're sort of inventing stories of how things are playing out on the pitch. Like, it feels like you're actually devising how is it a season in British football?
Yes, it is indeed.
Yeah. I got it right. I thought it was like a series, maybe, because over here it's like British TV. Anyway, so like a season, like, it sounds to me like you're sort of like generating a story about the season of football that you're having. That you were playing the game, and then, like, George, your team was 2-0 up, and then they've come back by 2 goals because you didn't change those tactics.
You absolutely do. You both have it in terms of the matches, how the season goes, but you develop relationships with your players. There are players that I will start to dislike because they have not played well, or they've been playing badly, and then complain that I've not been playing them because after they play badly. So I will have my own personal feelings, and I'll just say, you know what, I'm going to sell you because I can't be dealing with this anymore.
That's it.
Similarly, I can. There's a player who's not the greatest, but he's scrappy, and I know he tries really hard, and I like him, so I'll keep him around. I'll give him a new contract, even if he doesn't necessarily deserve it.
That's it. I have a massive hatred of a player called Talisca. He's a Brazilian player. He's just such a colossal.
Is this person
he
real?
is a real person, and I dislike him. I also
have you written to him?
I haven't written to him. I also dislike the Slovenian team Maribor for very long and complicated reasons involving them frustrating me in a Slovenian league season or two. But essentially. That's it, and you just get these. I mean, the thing is that. So we were talking about this. I did a podcast about Football Manager called the Deep Line Podcast, and like one of the most recent episodes, we were talking with a guy who actually scouts players for a living. So he actually works for Plymouth, Argyle, the football team, providing scouting data to the first team coach and to the manager. And we were talking about this, and like he was saying, like, we came up with the phrase which was the football managerization of football. Like, what's happened is this game has helped create a whole audience, particularly in the UK, of stats hungry nutters. And so when they're watching the football, I mean, like, for example, if you watch Sky Sports coverage of the transfer deadline, just sort of say the few days before teams can no longer sign players, when they're trying to explain how good a player is, they go, let's look at his Football Manager stats, and they'll pull it out and they'll put it on a screen. Amazing. And it's like they will go, Jack Wilshere's bravery is only 16, and it's just like, it's absurd. It really is absurd. I love the game, but it's just like, how on earth can someone genuinely, like someone was saying, how can you quantify the bravery of Jack Wilshere? How is that done? Is it the sort of, if he's willing to put his hand into a tub of tarantulas, then that's a solid 19. But, if he's a little bit too scared to put the cup over the top of a spider that's snuck into the house, that's a bravery of 4. It's like...
I like the idea of footballers kind of queuing up to go into several different rooms. In each room, they're giving a specific test on an attribute.
Yeah, that's it. It's just like the anticipation one, where they walk into the room and just someone's firing cannons of footballs at people, and it's just like, duck! Oh, you got hit in the face. That's a 7. And it's just like... so it is absurd. And like what he was saying is that, what you can do and what you can end up doing is you end up forgetting that Football Manager is a representation. It's a very convincing simulation and representation of football, but it's not football. Like he was talking about, like people who sort of go, oh yeah, I take over at these lower league teams and I give them loads of instructions and they're really successful. And he's like, I've got this one guy in the first team who I literally cannot give him more than 2 instructions because he can't remember them. And it's just like, but like what he's saying is, so, like in the game you can just do, oh, I'll do this, I'll do that, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. I just press these buttons and look at how good it's going. Whereas in real life, it's a bit like you have to manage the dynamic much more and the numbers don't add up because...
But things are very numbers based. The more and more I'm, the more I sort of learn about modern football, it does feel like it is becoming it feels like it is becoming like the refuge of the geeks. Like much like baseball was, again, I'm not massively au fait with North American baseball, but it feels like post Black Ball and post a book called Soccernomics by Cooper and Szymanski.
That's the one. Szymanski.
Stefan
Szymanski. Yep.
Szymanski. Which I was listening to a fascinating podcast all about. Since those books and since
that's a Football Manager required reading.
right. Okay. Well, I'll have to.
That's it. You can also add the numbers game to that list.
And inverting the pyramid.
Oh my word!
Inverting the pyramid is the tome.
So this is the art of war.
So this is exactly what I'm talking about now. Like, because I think there's an argument to be made here that, like, obviously, like the kind of people who listen to a geek culture show like the one that we do is like, when people start talking about football on that kind of a show, I kind of feel like there's a danger there that somebody's just going to turn off.
Sure, yeah.
But to me, the football is becoming this increasingly geeky pastime where we're talking about this Football Manager game. We're talking about real world football, and we're talking about the stories that come out of it. That to me feels a lot like live action role playing, and it feels a lot like that weird Reddit thread of this happened to me in Dark Souls. And now you guys are saying there are these books that you should be reading, and to me, like, football has become this statistics heavy thing where I think the general image of what somebody who is into football, I think, is really, really quite gradually changing from what it was when I was growing up, which was like, and I think when we were all growing up, really like a bit thuggish, lads on tour, sort of rubbish. And now it's becoming a lot more about thoughtful, intelligent people talking about, well, no, these are the hard statistics of how a game of football works, and Football Manager 17 and the Football Manager series in general feels like a reflection of what that actually of that.
Well, I think kind of the books that you mentioned there. I'm going to make up a word now, but the statification, that's my modern word, of football has kind of acted very much like an equaliser. So books like Soccernomics and those kind of things, because they can look at stats. Stats can be understood theoretically by anybody. If I try to explain to you my experience of going to a football match, it's much more difficult than me to say explaining to you a Football Manager match, because I can use statistics to kind of bring you onto my level. Whereas you don't have the experience of being at a live football match. It's more difficult because it's an emotional thing. It's an experience that I have trying to explain that. Whereas statistics, as I say, it's an equaliser, so you can get on board at that level and understand it on a basic level.
been fascinating hearing about Football Manager 17 and how the game generates these stories, and how there's a huge amount of like time sink, and how like it's driven on stats and all this sort of stuff. Because like. And yet it has this football theme, which I think puts a lot of people off. And for me, the game I've been playing a whole bunch has been Civilization 6.
Ooh.
And all of these things, like these, which, you know, to me, I feel like Civ 6 is a more traditional quote-unquote gamer game, if you know what I mean. Like, it's much more like, oh, I play video games, therefore the game I play is Civ, whereas like, oh, I play I like football, therefore I play Football Manager. But the comparisons there are really fascinating, because there is all of that stuff in there. Have either of you managed to either check Civ? Well, have either of you managed to check Civ 6 out?
I haven't, but I do know quite a few people who have. So there's a reason why I haven't checked Civ 6 out.
Go on.
It's because I have Football Manager, and Football Manager is already such a devastating time sink that it's just like so I've got 3 time sinks, which at the moment are Overwatch, Rocket League, and Football Manager 2017. I find it very difficult to play any other games at the best of times. Yeah. If I add Civilization to that, I genuinely think my life will just end.
Yeah, I think you'd be out of a house because you wouldn't go to work, right? I mean, to fit all that stuff in. So
in a switch round of our first conversation, me taking on the role of you, Pete, I have never played a Civilization game.
Have you not?
I actually don't really know. I'm imagining it's kind of like SimCity.
Right. You see, now this is why. To me, I wanted to get my head around what Football Manager was, because I knew that as an outsider, I had a wrong perspective on what that was, and I think the same. It can be said of Civilization, because no, it's not like SimCity. Like SimCity is the scale of SimCity is essentially one hexagon on the hundreds of hexagon map on Civilization. So SimCity is much more about, I wouldn't say micromanagement, because it's not like the Sims level of micromanagement, but it's micromanagement in you're saying, okay, put a housing district here, like very small little housing district here, and then there's going to be a park here and a nice little road down here, and this is how the waterworks will work. Civilization is a game that starts in, I want to say something like 3000 BC, certainly a few thousand BC, and then spans till 2300 AD.
Because the only thing I've seen about Civ 6 is the trailer.
Yes.
And so I'm really curious, because the trailer was really good.
Oh, well, the trailer is very good.
But I didn't really know what the game was from that, because it made it seem as if you could maybe do civilizations in lots of different places. But if it's the idea of starting in BC and then growing up to 2200... That sounds very, very interesting.
Right, okay. So that trailer did a really good job, I think, of communicating to people who'd never played Civ an idea of what Civ is. To people who had played Civ, I think a lot of people got really angry at that trailer, because it didn't really tell you anything about what was new about the game or what you could expect. And I went into Civ 6 having played about 20, 30 hours of Civ 5, which is not a lot, not at all. So Alex, my partner, her father on Civ 5, and this is one of his least favourite Civs, I think is clocking in at 1,500 hours now.
Yowza.
Yeah. So, and that's not his favourite, not by a long shot. So I kind of knew what to expect. I played Civ 5 and Civ 6, I was like, well, I don't really know what the big differences are going to be, at all. And so the core concept of Civilization has remained the same as you would expect and as you would want. So basically, Civilization is a game about you start as the leader of a people, and the leaders of the people are generally they are people from historical from history. So, for example, Gandhi, Elizabeth, Lincoln, that kind of thing. Like Civilization has these kinds of characters, and you pick these characters. So, for example, Civ 5 had Bismarck, and Bismarck has certain traits when you pick him that benefit you playing Civ in a certain way. So Bismarck had access to, I want to say, like industrialization and a specific unit in the field that was much better at stomping over certain bits of ground or whatever it was. So you pick to play as characters. They're mostly you're sort of choosing to play as a type of person rather than a specific person. And everybody else in the game has one of these characters as well. And you start the game by... It's all laid out on hexagons. It used to be on squares, but they got rid of that. It's all on hexagons. And the idea is that you found your first city, and you hope hopefully it'll be in a decent area. You can move your little settler around to make sure that you get into the right place. But there you go. You found your city. So you're like, okay, so what shall I do to get things started? I know. I'll start building a monument. So a monument builds up your culture, which is one of the resources that you have in the game. You have things like production, you have money, you have culture, and these are things that determine science, and you sort of build these resources up and you use those to advance your civilization forward. And you've built this monument, and so you're building up your culture. And so your civilization is a more cultured civilization. It gives access to things like... eventually it'll give access to things like theatre or to chariot racing or to other civil functions that will again continue to help your civilization grow out and become more dominant. So you have all of these other resources as well, and getting access to those is super useful, because having those resources allows you to build, if you've got horses, specific early units. Like if you don't have horses, you can't have cavalry. And cavalry are much, much better against certain types of other enemy units. So it means that, when you come up against them, if you've got horses and you've got that research and you're at roughly the same level, then you are able to use those units to outsmart your enemy, and your enemy has to go away and think about how they're actually going to try and defeat you.
So this isn't any kind of online game. It's playing against a computer.
So it's playing against the computer. There is online. So you have things like hot seats, which is kind of like a pass and play, I guess. It's basically where you play by email. So it's like you'll do all of your moves, and then you'll get to the end of the turn, and then it will send it off to the other person, and they'll get their thing, and they'll play their turn, they'll send it back to you, and all that sort of stuff.
Kind of like a board game.
This is the ultimate strategy board game, Dan. No mucking about this. This is like Catan plus. Like, it is really, really intense.
Oh, but I'm useless at Catan.
But you'll like this, I promise. So yeah.
Does it involve bartering? Because that's where I always fall down. I always piss someone off right at the start, and I ruin the game.
Oh, then you would fail miserably at bartering. So as I say, it's turn-based. The game's turn-based. You do all of your actions, you do all your things, and then you say, okay, next turn. Then a year passes generally, and everything happens, and then you see what the results of that were. You see what your opponent's actions are, and then you counter that. And the whole idea is to win through one of a number of different victory conditions, one of which might be so for example in Civ 6 you have the ability to win through tourism, which is your culture is so massively high and important and valued and respected that you have more people, more tourists from every other civilization visiting your civilization than they are staying at home and having their own holidays at home. Is
this basically a game designed to create the next European city of culture? Is this basically what this game is?
So if you want it to, in some ways, if you want to go down that cultural route, you will learn loads about how cities and civilizations flourish as cultural cities. You'll also learn, because culture is not the only way that you're going to win. So you might instead decide that you're going to play as Bapu Gandhi, which is what I'm playing at the moment. I am currently 18 hours into my first game of Civ 6. So these are long.
So is each kind of historical figure and period basically a level?
No, I'll come on to that in a second. So basically, each historical figure is like playing as an archetype of a character. So it's like in JRPGs, Bapu Gandhi would be like he would be the cleric, whereas playing as Bismarck, you would probably say that they were the knight or something like that. Like they have archetypes of things they are particularly good at, but they are not confined to their own time or to historical accuracy of how their cultures actually work. Like, for example, which is going on to like how I'm playing at the moment, for example, Bapu Gandhi is so he's all about faith. Generally, he's very much about like he gets advantages and so forth from his own people using their faith to make great things happen. So you build up this faith resource, which comes through your religion and through building religious sites and monuments and so forth. And because you build this currency up, you can then use that to spend on. You might spend it on apostles to go and wage religious war on your opponents, which is to say they try and convert people to your religion, and if they're converted to your religion, you get a whole bunch of free stuff for that happening because you're spreading your religion across the world. Again, that's one of the victory conditions. You can just spread your religion across the world. But the game I've been having. Gandhi, unfortunately, has got himself into a bit of a pickle.
Oh, Gandhi.
Gandhi, with the French. So the French are they're on my continent. So it's a representation of the whole world. They're on my continent. We're the only two civilizations on my continent. There's another much larger one that I still haven't got to. Remember, Dan, 18 hours into the game, and I've not seen the other side of the world yet. It
takes a long time to get to the other side of the world.
It absolutely does. So initially, I was like role playing as Gandhi, right? You guys were talking about Football Manager and how like you're figuring out how the match plays out and what they're all about. I'm role playing as Gandhi, or at least I was. And I was like, I want to be about peace. I want to be about intelligence. I want to be about faith. I want to spread these things out and bring peace to the world. And the French were having none of it. They basically, I was like, so I was doing this trading that you touched on there, Dan. I was getting it. I found them. I got in touch with them. I was like, hey guys, I'd like to come over to our city. Come and have a look at our city. And the French were like, no. So they weren't interested in visiting me. I was like, oh, okay, tetchy. All right, that's fine. I'll win them over with love. So I was like sending them gifts because you can trade. So I was saying, well, I've got like 30 gold that I've got spare. Why don't I just give you this? And also, I have plenty of chocolate in my land. I'm going to give you money and I'm going to give you chocolate. And I sent that over to the French.
Are you seriously trying to woo them?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I was like, look, guys, let's work together.
Were you batting your eyelashes at them?
Absolutely.
Showing them a bit of leg.
Gandhi's got lovely legs. So doing all that sort of stuff, and then on a dime, their grand plan was unfurled, and they turned their backs on me and they said, "Surprise! This fake friendship has gone far enough. We wage war with you." And so suddenly now, Gandhi, leading his peaceful people in India, these very devout Sikhs, are now at war with the French. And I spend the next 40 years in the game waging this bitter, destructive, pointless war against the French.
Gandhi.
And it's this hard fought battle. And then suddenly, three-quarters of the way through it, the Germans turn up, and so do the Romans. And so I'm like, oh no, because the Germans immediately they immediately strike up something with the French, who are losing this battle with the Indians, by the way.
Hang on, are these Germans and Romans from the same time period?
No, so the Germans, so they are from the same time period, in so much as we're all playing in the same time period and we all have access to the same technology.
Okay, so it's not like the Nazis and the Roman Empire show up.
No, absolutely not. So the Germans turn up and they're pals with the French. It turns out, because they've already met, and so I'm like, oh god, this is not good. And then, in a stroke of luck, I meet the Romans, and the Romans hate the Germans. They absolutely hate them, and they're already at war. But the Germans love me. The Romans absolutely love me, and they decide that they're going to ally with me. And we say, let's defend one another. And immediately, the Germans back off. The French are still after me, and I managed to beat them right down and sort of fend everything off. And then we negotiate a peace deal. They give me 2 of their cities and a whole bunch of money because they're very, very upset that they tried to wage war on me, and we're really sorry about all of this. And in 300 years' time, they'll try and do exactly the same thing again. But anyway, and that all took place over the course of about 6 or 7 hours, and was utterly thrilling. Like, this kind of strategic thinking about how am I going to build my civilization? How am I going to explore the world? How shall I interact with other cultures? Morally and philosophically, what do I want to say in this game? And, you know, how do I want to win this game? And by winning the game, what you're essentially saying is, you know, do I want to destroy large chunks of civilizations and dominate, or do I want to be peaceful and run the United Nations, or do I want my culture to just be a shining beacon to everyone? And it's fascinating. Now, I think there's a thing, Dan, that you're stumbling upon, which is this idea of like different time periods. So everyone goes through the game, and everyone starts at the same era with the same technologies and the same access to everything. So the Egyptians and the North Americans, they're led by people from very different eras, but they all start as like no more than barbarians, really. Like right back in the day, like the first weapons you have are like, I mean, they're clubs and arrows. They're not even spears. Like you've got to research iron, like, you know. So, and then you go all the way up. So at the moment, you know, you can very easily foresee a period of time where, you know, you're 2100 and the Egyptians are sending men and women to the moon. You know, it's very it plays with that historical setting a lot. And I've just splurged all over this.
Maybe this is kind of a question for kind of George as well, because I know, George, you've obviously got some experience with kind of other Civ games. Mm-hmm. As I say, I've never played any of these, and by the sounds of it, you're not kind of saying that there's anything completely different to some of the older games. So in terms of accessibility, as we kind of mentioned when we talked about Football Manager, if you don't have any experience with these games, when you step in, because what you're talking about there in terms of creating peace treaties and the moral decisions you're making, that sounds very like there's a lot of stuff to be thinking about. How easy is it? How kind of spoon-fed is it at the start to bring a new player in?
Well, I found that whenever I've played Civ, that I've actually gotten the hang of it fairly quickly. I mean, in terms of like the core of what it is, because Pete was mentioning about the fact that it's kind of like the most sort of awesome board game in the world ever, and it has that similar thing about a board game where it feels like you sort of have to have a sort of a quick go of the instructions. I don't fully understand this, but I'm going to give it a go. And then you give it a go, and you're like, okay, I was useless at that, but now I understand how it works, so now I can do much better at it. And I mean, like, what Pete was saying, I mean, the thing that I found really fascinating hearing you talk all about that, Peter, is the fact that the people who I talk to regularly in the Football Manager community, their time, they're basically, you know, a lot of particularly the experienced people who've played it for a long time, it's pretty much a toss-up between Civ or Football Manager. Because even though they're very different games in terms of what you're doing, like, to be successful in both of them, you have to be like, who are we? What are we doing? How are we going to do it? How do we achieve those objectives in a practical way? What steps do I have to take? You know, you have to do all of those things. And so it means that I think even though Civ is obviously a completely different kettle of fish to Football Manager. The mindset of the players of those games actually really closely match up. So even if you're sort of a bit like, why is Gandhi ridiculously aggressive? That's sort of, that's one of the sort of a particular sort of classic
When did he
Civ
become
tropes.
a warlord?
Yeah.
Well, so the joke actually, Dan, is in Civ 5. I believe the vanilla version of Civ 5, he was the one who, if you got to the late game, he was the one who was most likely to nuke you. Which, I mean, who knows? I mean, he didn't live that long enough to get to that period of time, I guess. But yeah, but Civilization has those stories. Yeah. Like it has the Indians and the French hated one another and they had an animosity for 40 years. It builds those stories out. I mean, I don't know about you, George, but like, I kind of feel like it's one of those games where, as you say, it's like you start the game, you put it on the very easiest mode that you can, and you let the advisor very, very quickly walk you through some of the steps of the opening game until you understand what you're doing, and then suddenly it's a little bit like riding a bike, in that suddenly your parents are behind you and they're not holding on to you anymore, and you're riding.
Or the other one that I think is like it's the mate who introduces you to a new board game. It's the person, I'm particularly leaving the advisor on. It's that kind of sense of someone who's sitting there and you're sat on the other side of the table and they go, okay, so you want to do this and you're doing this for this reason. And you go, okay. And they go, did you get that? And you go, maybe. Maybe I got that.
Let's try it one more time.
Let's try it one more time. Exactly.
Let's pretend that I didn't get it.
This is just a dummy hand. This is just we're going to redeal this, but I mean, like, this is it. Like, I was went on holiday with a couple of my friends to Brussels a few weeks ago, and they introduced me to a couple of new card games. It's that kind of feeling of someone going, okay, here's how this works, so when this happened, it's like this, and you go, okay. And then when you're initially doing it, you're like, I know what we're doing mechanically, but I don't know how any of that fits into strategy. And then you start winning and losing some games, and or you start doing something well, and you're like, oh, actually, it's like the synapses firing off. It's like, okay, I can do this, and if I do this, then could I do this? And you go,
and it's like you need to be, if let's say it's a 4-player game, you need to be the person who comes third, and at the end of it go, that's why I came third, because I didn't set this, and this up. Like Civ definitely has that. Like, some of the things you'll do in Civ, there are decisions that I made in Civ 6 4 hours ago that are biting me in the arse right now. Like, and they are decisions sometimes that were very, very deliberate and thoughtful. Like, I will aggressively pursue diplomatic relations with city-states, because those city-states, if I'm seen as like their benefactor, they are more likely to come to my aid. Like, they are more like people are less likely to come after me because they know that I've got access to these city-states and I can use their armies and all that sort of stuff. And then some of the decisions I made, I didn't make them actively. Like, I just kind of left my religion to do whatever it wanted. I didn't really focus on religion at all, and it's meant that my ability to get access to more important buildings and to basically just buy my way through some of the tech, through some of the building list for my city and upgrading my city, that's been a lot harder recently. So it's meant that I've gone, this is going really badly, so I need to change the focus of my economy much more on, like, straight up money. Like, I just need to be rich so that if I'm attacked by France again, then I've got enough coffers to buy units just straight out the gate, and just be like, no way, I've got people defending my cities. Now, did you? So, George, you played Civ 5, right?
I played. I'll be honest. It was back Civ 4. That's how long ago it was.
Civ 4.
I know exactly.
Ooh,
exactly. So it's been a while, but it's one of those things. I mean, like the way I'd sort of say it to Dan is that I keep couching it in Football Manager terms, but that's because I know that this will get through to you. But it's
Yes,
like
indeed.
so. But I mean, it's a bit like in Football Manager, you can do things like manage your wage budget. So you'll make sure that your players are on a certain amount of wages, so that you don't go in the red. But then just imagine that instead of just being able to do that, you were able to then take over at more sort of a board level as well. And you were able to say, okay, instead of my club being all about developing young talent, we're going to become a Galacticos thing, and we're going to start doing marketing deals. And
Okay,
you
so
start
he's
doing
looking at it
marketing.
from a higher level.
That's it. And it's like Civ is basically the most zoomed out level that you could get in terms of high level. It's instead of going, civilizations are constructs of history and of people doing things over a period of time and different people shaping things in different way. Civ is basically like, right, forget all that nonsense. It's you're in charge of this civilization. You steer it in whatever way you want, but you've got to steer it because otherwise you're not going to win.
And it's really fascinating. Like I keep finding myself like thinking about, like, I will make a decision and then I'll, as the turn is going through, because obviously the computer's got to do a whole bunch of stuff in the background, figuring out who's going to move what and what all the opponent's going to do. Sometimes I'll catch myself going, why did I do that? Like, not just from a strategy point of view, but from a moral point of view. There are decisions I could have made in Civ which I specifically didn't, because I didn't agree with going down that route morally. Like, it would have been beneficial 60 years ago in the game for me to adopt nationalism. But for me personally, I just couldn't deal with that. And, I could have adopted fascism if I wanted to. And that would have been actually quite useful at one point. But I was like, A, I'm not like that. And B, Gandhi's not like that. But and it does make you question what you will do to be successful, and it's a really interesting reflection of civilization building and global politicking and like ethical questions that people who make very big decisions have to come to.
To be fair, Pete, I think even before you told me about this, explained how much you love this game, I'd kind of got an inkling when just the other day we occasionally play video games together, and we'd arrange to play video games together.
Don't throw me under the bus.
I'm going to throw you under the bus, but it's okay because it'll come out and it'll be okay. I'm not going to be mad at you at the end of it.
All right. Okay, go on then.
Because we'd arranged to play video games, and the time rolled around, at which point we're trying to figure out, I'm asking you, Pete, when are we going to play? When are we going to play? I'm waiting. When are we going to play? And then I get a message back from you saying, I can't play. I've decided I'm playing too much Civ 6. So you dumped me for Civ 6.
Yep.
I was left bewildered, bereft, with a PlayStation controller in my hand and nothing to play.
I'm willing to jeopardise friendships
To play Civ 6.
To play Civ 6.
But the silver lining of that, because what made up for it was the fact that I decided, you know what, I'm not even going to play any games. I'm going to watch some telly. So I popped onto iPlayer, and I watched him, which I believe, George, you've seen as well, which was kind of amazing.
Yes. It was Planet Earth 2.
It's Planet Earth 2, and it was kind of amazing.
Have you seen it yet, Peter?
Dan sent me a text saying it's got crabs, and I was like,
You've got to watch it. You've got to watch it.
Just so you know, George, I have somewhat of a fear of crabs.
Right.
And so, having seen that first episode, you can imagine how I felt at a certain segment of that episode.
Yeah, there was a certain segment which could have been described as rather crabby. And that was not just in terms of how it was feeling. But seriously, it was absolutely stunning television. Like some of the stuff they showed. I mean, it was basically like Game of Thrones Nature Documentary Edition, in which, horrible things happened. Some really horrible things happened. But it was so...
Like what
so,
sort of...
have you seen...
It's about nature. I like animal documentaries where they're like, look at this cute koala. Look how silly he is.
There's an amazing sloth.
There is an amazing sloth.
Oh.
So that will give you that. Have you heard anything about iguanas and snakes on social media this week? Okay.
Oh no, I did. Yeah, no, I saw
You saw
something.
something.
It was like an iguana and a snake.
Pete, you know Chris refers to himself as a racing snake.
Yeah.
This episode contains actual racing snakes.
And they're not very nice.
No.
So what happens is, okay, so they go to this island and they're sort of saying, oh, look, here is this iguana. And he lives peacefully on the island. And look at this.
Yeah,
and then they're sort of doing, oh, this is cute. This is a really big iguana. But then he gets flies on his faces. So a smaller lizard will sit on the iguana's head and eat the flies. And so you just see these...
It's all very nice and jaunty.
Exactly, all very nice and jaunty. And they go to this beach and the iguanas lay their eggs in the beach. And then the egg hatches and the iguana climbs out of the sand, the baby iguana. So this is a baby iguana.
That sounds nice.
Then they have to run across a plain as fast as they can because otherwise they'll be eaten by snakes that are waiting to catch them as they emerge from the sand for the first time.
It's literally like some kind of gladiatorial gauntlet that they have to run.
It's basically, I mean, so imagine... Like, you're a small child, you've just been raised at home, and you're free, and you're told, right, you can go to school, but you've got to make a 200-metre dash down the road, past those 5 men dressed as clowns with knives. If you get to the other end, you get to go to school. If you don't, you very much don't get to go to school. And that is what happened to a large number of baby iguanas, except replace knife-wielding clowns with snakes that hunt in packs.
Oh my god!
But the only thing that kind of lightens it ever so slightly is that when the baby iguanas run, they look hilarious.
They do look hilarious. I mean, like that's the thing is they look hilarious, and it's like when one of them gets away, it's like there's that bit in Empire Strikes Back where the rebel transporters are going and it's just like transporters gone away, yeah, it's like you really get that sort of G'd up moment when one of the iguanas survives, but the rest of it is like grim horror, but it's just so brilliantly shot and just so it's just such fascinating television. And I mean I'm not I've got like kind of a HD TV and stuff. I don't watch much HD TV because a lot of the time I don't think it's worth it, just because I don't get that much out of it. But absolutely, every time I watch one of the David Attenborough documentaries and stuff like that, it's just stunning. And you have to watch it in as high definition as you can get because the colours... I physically don't know how they get some of the shots that they do, such close-ups. Yeah, like the techniques that they have to go through to actually get as close to the animals as they do, it's amazing. Like they get really like right up next to a Komodo dragon, like 2 of them having a fight, which is like, oh my god, this is so intense. But then there's just, I mean, the thing as well is just like it was just a really funny documentary in the sense that it was kind of swinging between tone. So it was kind of like, oh look, here are the happy penguins. Oh look, they're all on the island, and it's a peaceful island, and they're all safe on the island. But the reason why they're safe is because there's a sheer cliff face which the penguins have to climb up when they've been out fishing at sea, and like waves smack against it, and like they sort of show penguins like hobbling back with like blood running down their sides, and you're like, oh my god, this is so horrible. And then like the crabs, like with that sorry, I'm just ruining it all, but the crabs, so the thing is just like, oh look at these crabs, this is amazing, these crabs live in a forest and maintain a habitat, and then 50 million of them walk out to sea at one time. That sounds magical, right? And then suddenly what happens is they do walk out to sea, provided that they don't get attacked by yellow ants that spray acid in their faces and kill them.
I'm not going to lie, I was at that point I was fast-forwarding.
You were fast-forwarding. I thought you would just be cheering because of the large number of crabs that were being slaughtered.
Well, now I know they meet their demise, then I'm absolutely going to go back and watch it.
But it's one of those things in which it's just like, I mean, we're recording this on an interesting day in human history, and you're like, sometimes you sit there and you think life can be pretty bad for us. But then I think there's no point where I've had insects spray acid in my eye and eat me. So
Yet.
I like to sort of, but I like to sort of balance it out. Like, we've not had the greatest of times at the moment, but I'm yet to be hunted to my death by a pack of snakes. So it's kind of like, it's Planet Earth. It's both beautifully shot, fascinating, and a very handy reminder that however bad I think my life is, I could be one of those baby iguanas.
Might have some dinner. I've discovered a range of vegetarian hot dogs, which, you know, you eat normal hot dogs, and they, like, and I mean like frankfurters, and they don't. Something about them doesn't feel like they are meat.
The texture is very processed.
Yeah. Well, these vegetarian ones are exactly the same and taste exactly the same, and I'm like, these are better. like clearly, I don't know what the difference. I mean, clearly the difference is a horse wasn't murdered, but like, or whatever it is. But like, I don't know. I'm telling you, vegetarian hot dogs. They've nailed it. Bacon can't do it. No, not really.
Well, no, because that's just a slice of. That's just a slice of meat.
Exactly. Yeah, I tried a vegetarian pork cutlet. No. I mean, it was fine, but not pork cutlet. Linda McCartney's fucking nailed. Absolutely fucking nailed.
Well, because the whole thing about sausages and hot dogs and things like that is they're just reconstituted bits of other bits put together. So, with the meat, you barely get any meat in a sausage anyway. So the majority of the stuff in the sausage is not sausage. It's just not meat. So it means that you can. It means you can just make anything into a sausage. You could have like a chocolate sausage or something.
You could buy higher meat content sausage. You can buy, I think, pork sausages, which is something like 98% pork.
Yeah, but that's unwieldy. It's just
that's too much.
Yeah, that's an unwieldy amount of pork. Yeah,
it's an unwieldy sausage. I mean, that's just meat. At that rate,
that's a pork chop.
Exactly.
That's not hot dog fodder. That's not American mustard and tomato ketchup fodder. That's, I'm going to have that with a nice little bit of mash and maybe.
It's kind of one that the hot dog seller takes out of the water to put in your bun.
Yeah. That's
you
what
want something
I want.
that you just sort of bite through, essentially.
Yeah, that really has little more consistency.
That offers no resistance to your eating.
The ultimate sausage is one that offers no resistance. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah, I think we can all agree on that.
That was Staying In with me, Daniel Frost, Peter Willington and George Osborn. A huge thanks to George for joining us, and if you want to see more from him, you can catch his podcast on all things Football Manager, the Deep Line podcast, which is out weekly. I highly recommend it. It's one of my favourites. You can also find him on Twitter on @GeorgeOsborn. Remember, it's without the E on Osborn. And speaking of Twitter, you can also follow us there by going to @StayingInPod. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to head over to iTunes, Stitcher, Acast, or wherever you get your podcast to subscribe and leave us a review. It's the best way of letting other people know about the show. And also, every time we get a review, Pete does a little dance. You should see it. It's adorable. And finally, head over to stayingin.podbean.com for information on all of our episodes and links to everything discussed today. Until next time, thanks for listening.